Well, hi everyone. I'm recording this video on Tuesday, June 3rd, 2025. At the end of this week, on June 6th, Friday, Rhode Island DOT is scheduled to announce the selected contractor for the design, build, replacement for the westbound Washington Bridge. So I'm going to touch on that in this video, but more importantly, there's been some really good local reporting, particularly by Rhode Island PBS, that I want to cover here, and also tie it into some local interviews with RiDOT Director Peter Alviti. And I want to give you my take on some of the statements that he's made, because I'm sure that the people in Rhode Island state government can't wait to award this contract so that the narrative can focus on what's going forward with the replacement for the bridge. They don't want to be looking back. They haven't answered questions about what happened in the past. There's been, in my view, a complete lack of transparency, a complete lack of accountability on the events that led up to the emergency closure of the westbound Washington Bridge in December of 2023. So I want to point out some specific instances for why I have this opinion. So I'm going to start out with this interview that was last week on WPRI.
Rhode Island DOT Director Peter Alviti, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
So lots of bridge news to talk about, but before we get to the contract and how much it's going to cost, how long it's going to take, I want to talk to you about an investigative report that just came out earlier this week. Rhode Island Public Radio, the Public's Radio, and Rhode Island PBS. They found that the DOT could have and maybe should have used sort of X-ray technology on the Washington Bridge to find those critical failures before the time that you did. They said that there are no records that show you did this. Did the DOT use that technology to inspect the bridge?
So I've said many times, Kim, we have a court case pending. The Attorney General is handling a court case. We've been in numerous discussions with the attorneys that are handling this court case, and they've advised us not to speak on the case. And these issues go to the main case. They have to do with what will be argued in court. Is it the responsibility of the experts? It's funny you should mention X-ray. You go to a doctor, you say you have a symptom. They determine for you what tests are necessary. They are the experts. You don't tell them, I want an X-ray or I want an MRI. They tell you, they're supposed to tell you and advise you, I think you have this, so therefore get an X-ray. That's the crux of the case that's being brought. We hired private engineering companies as the experts for us. That's been going on for decades. And the court case is about that very substance.
Well, in my opinion, that's nonsense for a couple of reasons. First of all, he can talk about some aspects of what's happened in the past. You know, these lawsuits go back about 10 years, and issues with the Washington Bridge go back 30 years or more. And of course, they don't want to talk about it because they want to completely avoid accountability for their actions, in my opinion. And part of this narrative with this lawsuit is that the contractor and these design consultants are the experts, and Rhode Island DOT officials know nothing about bridge construction, know nothing about bridge design, that they're 100% reliant on what other people tell them. And again, that's nonsense. If you look at his example here about going to a doctor, I had many instances where I questioned what the doctor told me. I've had instances where the doctors wanted to do some low-level diagnostic test when I thought a high-level test was needed. I had an instance where my wife had a serious medical issue and they were going to discharge her from the ER, and I threw a fit. And they ended up admitting her to the hospital and ran more tests and found a life-threatening situation. So to suggest that the DOT just sits back and does whatever advice the so-called experts dispense with an uncritical eye, unquestioning mindset is just embarrassing, I think. And again, I've been in contact with some great people who work for Rhode Island DOT. I just don't think great people in terms of competence and skill and candor exist at the high levels of management at Rhode Island DOT. So we know the lawsuit against these 13 defendants, contractors and design consultants, is being run by the Attorney General's Office of Rhode Island. Now, this is a great piece that ran in December. Gabrielle Caracciola with WJAR, and it's a 2-minute segment. I don't think I have all 2 minutes here, but it's the most damning indictment of this narrative that Rhode Island DOT is not allowed to talk about these lawsuits. And it's all laid out in this video clip. And frankly, I'm surprised that more hasn't come of this in the 5 months that have ensued since this piece aired in December.
But many questions remain about what went wrong and who is to blame. NBC 10's Gabrielle Caracciola looks back at the commuter crisis with RiDOT Director Peter Alviti.
Have you made changes within the Department of Transportation in the year since, updating any internal policies or procedures?
So during the last 8 years, we have made immense changes to the way that we do business at DOT, and we continue to do that on an annual basis. And this year, we did too. Yes.
What are some of those changes?
I won't get into specifics with you.
Just on the bridge inspection process where concerns have been raised.
Any matters that have anything to do with the lawsuit, you'll need to address to the attorneys.
But you won't say if you're changing the bridge inspection manual as a result of concerns with the inspections?
I'm not saying anything that pertains to the litigation. I refer all of that to the attorneys.
Well, I think that's ridiculous. I mean, he's not being asked about specific personnel matters. He was asked about, in broad terms, what, if anything, have they changed about the way they operate at Rhode Island DOT to make sure that they don't have another surprise emergency closure of an important bridge in Rhode Island. And he's hiding it behind this lawsuit yet again.
I sat down with Rhode Island Attorney General Peter Nurona, who's leading that lawsuit. Obviously, you don't want to jeopardize the lawsuit at all. How do you kind of navigate those two elements of wanting to be transparent, but also wanting to get as much money as possible?
You know, I can't speak for the director. I mean, we haven't given them any directives not to share information. I know that sometimes that it's easy to say, you know, the lawyers won't let us talk about this. But my message to DOT is, you know, share what you can, and if you're concerned about something, come to us for guidance. To my knowledge, they haven't done that.
So you heard what Attorney General Peter Nurona said. He's never instructed Rhode Island DOT to not talk about the Washington Bridge, and he's also saying they never came to him to clarify what they could talk about and what they should remain silent on. So it's just a complete smokescreen. You know, Director Alvidi is a political appointee. He currently serves at the pleasure of Governor Dan McKee of Rhode Island. So in my view, Director Alvidi's far more a politician than he is an engineer in terms of his statement and conduct, in my opinion. And frankly, I don't think anything's going to change in Rhode Island state government in terms of transparency or accountability relative to these bridge projects as long as Director Alvidi and Governor McKee are still in state government, in my opinion. Now, one key aspect of RiDOT's responsibility is their bridge inspection manual. The latest copy that I found online has this section where it says the Rhode Island DOT program manager is ultimately responsible for conducting these bridge inspections and issuing the report. So I don't know if he's alluding to they've changed that language to try and throw more responsibility onto their consultants. But again, they're the DOT. They can't completely eliminate their responsibility, nor should they, in my opinion, in terms of proper conduct of these inspections and implementing any corrective repairs or maintenance. I mean, the whole saga with the Washington Bridge, right after the emergency closure, Director Alvidi's trying to assert, or he did assert, that there was some extraordinary event that caused these anchor rods to break. And of course, we know that's not true. And the discovery of the broken anchor rods led to a much more detailed investigation of the condition of the bridge. And they found several issues, particularly with the post-tension members in terms of corrosion and deterioration, that forced them to close the bridge to avoid a catastrophic failure that, had that happened, would have killed dozens of people in all likelihood. So let's go back to this PBS story here. Here's a good lead-in from WPRI.
So,
Do you think, let's zoom out then from the Washington Bridge, do you think you should employ that technology perhaps more readily on other bridges, given the condition of so many of our bridges?
I'm not going to speculate on other bridges. This was a unique case. It was a unique bridge. The only one in our inventory that was built with that kind of technology. So that's as far as I'm going to comment on that.
Well, it's interesting that over the last several decades, many DOTs have discovered problems with their post-tension systems in their bridges. Corrosion of the tendons, lack of bond between the tendons and the surrounding concrete, a whole host of issues. So if you own one of those bridges and you see other state DOTs having problems with their bridges of similar construction, shouldn't the light bulb go on that, hey, maybe we need a more intensive investigation for this bridge? I mean, the fact is, the discovery of the broken anchor rods led to a much more intensive investigation. But that type of investigation involving x-rays and other technology has been available for many, many years. But yet they didn't do that as part of their routine inspection or as part of a special inspection for whatever reason. To me, it just speaks of complete negligence on the part of Rhode Island DOT. And the other point there is, he said he's not going to speculate about using these advanced investigation methods as non-destructive test methods on other bridges. So what he's saying is they've learned nothing from their experience with the Washington Bridge, apparently. So let's jump into a few segments with this Rhode Island PBS piece. Full disclosure, they interviewed me along with several other engineers for this piece. And there's a link in the description. I strongly recommend you check out this video of theirs. It's about 11 minutes long, but it lays out some important aspects of this emergency closure for the Washington Bridge, in my opinion.
They've become some of the most talked about images in Rhode Island, photos of broken anchor rods on the westbound Washington Bridge taken in December of 2023. It led to the emergency closure of the westbound bridge and triggered further evaluation. Its traffic was offloaded onto the newer eastbound bridge. A report by engineering consultants delivered 3 months after the shutdown found a laundry list of deficiencies. The next day, Governor Dan McKee announced the bridge needed to be demolished and rebuilt.
So you saw that list of deficiencies. That was compiled 3 months after the closure of the Washington Bridge by VN engineers. And these are things that have existed for many, many years, if not decades. But again, because of the essentially accidental discovery of the broken anchor rods, they finally did an intensive investigation of the condition of the bridge and said, not only can we not repair this in any reasonable fashion, essentially it needs to be demolished and replaced, which is what they ended up doing.
Many of the problems with the bridge relate to what's called the post-tensioning system. Steel cables called tendons run through ducts in concrete.
The cables kind of act like a rubber band that squeezes the concrete and keeps it in place.
David Latanzi is an associate professor at George Mason University. He's a former bridge engineer and inspector. One issue, he says, is that many important components of this kind of bridge are buried in concrete.
You're trying to look inside these ducts to see what is going on, but visually we can't inspect them. And so we need to use other technologies to verify that we've got a good seal or whether or not there's water inside. And this has been a long-standing problem for those kinds of components.
So non-destructive testing or non-destructive evaluation can include a variety of methods: X-rays, ground penetrating radar. Again, these technologies have been around for a long time. Apparently it's new to Rhode Island DOT, although their consultant who evaluated the bridge post-emergency closure used these technologies and found that the bridge was in terrible condition.
We asked RiDOT, the Rhode Island Department of Transportation, for an interview with Director Peter Alviti. A spokesman declined our requests, citing the ongoing lawsuit the state filed against 13 companies that did work related to the bridge. When we followed up and asked RiDOT if the department was aware of tendon failures in post-tensioned bridges across the country, a spokesman again declined to answer because of the litigation. According to the state's lawsuit, engineering firms failed to identify red flags that compromise the structural safety and integrity of the bridge. Attorneys representing Rhode Island also say issues with the post-tensioning system were first brought to the state's attention back in 1992, which included concerns about corrosion from moisture and salt exposure.
Well, there you heard again the excuse of the lawsuit not to provide any transparency, any accountability about what led to the emergency closure of this bridge. What have they learned, if anything? How can the public be confident that other bridges that they cross every day are safe? You know, Rhode Island DOT and Rhode Island state government can't have it both ways. They can't take the politically expedient route of, hey, no comment, and at the same time make a credible defense of what they say can be relied upon. So again, I think it would have been far more valuable, instead of filing this lawsuit, to get to the bottom of what happened, disclose what happened, what they learned, how they're going to change things for the future, what the condition is of the other bridges in the inventory. Are they safe? What actions need to be taken to make sure they stay safe? And if they need repairs or maintenance, what that entails and when would it be done should be disclosed. You know, this PBS story referenced this lawsuit and the citation of problems with the post-tension elements documented clear back in 1992. And I was able to obtain the full report from Liechtenstein. This was in early 1992. And I want to read the circle portion here. Our inspection confirms that the condition of the shiplap details, corbels, in the precast post-tension concrete cantilever beams are deteriorating. The damage found is localized to the area below the roadway joints and is more severe on the lower shiplap corbel, which supports the drop-in spans. Okay, well, I've mentioned that before, that what has really contributed to the deterioration of structural steel elements in this bridge, or the post-tension cables as well, is the road salts that aren't allowed to drain from the snowmelt on the bridge deck because of clogged drains. I mean, there's been numerous instances of inspection reports documenting the poor condition of these drains. Now, this is what they're supposed to look like. They cleaned them out here in April of 2024. But before that, for years, they were just chock full of sediment, vegetative matter, and just all kinds of debris that prevents free drainage of water from the bridge deck, particularly in the winter when that water contains road salts. So in 1992, Liechtenstein performed X-ray testing of the anchorages in the bridge. So that technology's been around for a very long time. And they recommended, again, 1992, that RiDOT perform additional non-destructive testing. And this is an interesting statement in this report, in my opinion. If it is anticipated that long-term repairs will be delayed for a substantial period of time, RiDOT should consider measures to repair the existing severely deteriorated locations early, particularly in the slow-hand lane. So why would they think that RiDOT would take a long time to effect emergency repairs? So again, I don't know that Rhode Island DOT's narrative is sustainable in terms of, hey, we can't talk about what we may or may not have done leading up to the emergency closure of the bridge. Let's just focus on the construction of the new bridge. And there should be focus going forward on the new bridge, but they can do both. They should be able to walk and chew gum at the same time, in my opinion. But fortunately, they do have two heavy hitter contractors competing for the replacement of this bridge. You have American Bridge and Walsh Construction. And again, we'll know on Friday which team was selected. They'll outline the design of the bridge that they're proposing, as well as the cost and schedule for completion. Now, I'd be interested in your thoughts about what the likely replacement costs will be, as well as the time frame for completion of the replacement. This is off the RiDOT Washington Bridge website, where they talk about how they got a $220 million federal grant, and that was approved here recently. But they estimate $368 million for full replacement. Well, we know that the demolition of the westbound bridge is going to cost nearly $100 million. They're well into, I think, $70+ million at this point. So that leaves roughly $268 million for the construction of the new bridge. And I think the actual cost is going to be far in excess of that. So just the replacement of the bridge, I think, is going to be well above $300 million, but we'll see. So let me know your thoughts in the comments section. I want to mention I have a Buy Me a Coffee opportunity. There's a link in the description where you can contribute to support this channel. I use it for a variety of production enhancements, but also, more importantly, to avoid sponsorships. I'm not saying I'll never have a sponsorship on this channel, but it's something I really want to avoid because, frankly, I think it's annoying when I see videos with a minute-long commercial, and we know YouTube has plenty of commercials as it is. So I think that's a step too far that I would really like to avoid. So again, if you're so inclined, please check it out. I also want to send out a shout out to the channel members. Thank you very much, as well as those of you who provided super thanks and comments to these videos. So please stay tuned. I'll do a follow-up video once the selected contractor for the design build replacement has been announced, as well as I'll continue to follow ongoing developments with the replacement of this bridge. Thanks very much, everyone.